Goes back to actually when they did worked on the comprehensive plan. I think it was 2011 they put that out, and I looked at that, and there was a lot of good material in there. For example, they recommended a living shore for protecting the shoreline, and it was mostly from an erosion standpoint. They did have some very good points in there also about they should evaluate the potential for sea level rise, storm surge, and stuff like that, but they really didn't address flood protection per se. So, and then in 2017, they put out their, it's called a Waterfront Implementation Plan. And so being a resident here, I noticed, going all the way back when we first moved here in 2003, that the city was vulnerable to high, tide flooding and also stormwater flooding. And so I approached the city about, let's do a grant for FEMA. And I was familiar with that because I used to be a contractor to FEMA, so I knew the process. So I met with the city manager and the city engineer, and they said, yeah, okay, let's do it. So we put that application in, and we got the grant. So it's a FEMA. It's a FEMA flood mitigation. It's called Advanced Assistance Grant.
But was there a dollar amount?
It's $250,000, and now that's total. 187,000 was FEMA federal money. The 62,005, 25% was a city match. And
has the city matched that?
Well, we're in the process of doing it. So the grant. So we're going to finish this. It's like a master planning effort, and we're going to probably finish here in September, October timeframe. That's our goal, because now we have a well-defined project that we can move forward now for design and construction. We've got 4 grants in progress. One of them is to cover half of that match, and that is with the Maryland Department of Environment. And then we have a 3rd grant in process with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, where they're funding projects for nature-based flood mitigation, like the Living Shore. And the dollars aren't as big, so we're only proposing a small part of our project for that, and that would be the Great Marsh area or Jerry Boyle Park. And then we have a 4th grant in play with the Fish and Wildlife Federation, National Fish and Wildlife Federation, in cooperation with NOAA. And this is also for nature-based flood mitigation. And of course, it's got an ecology end of it because of the fish and wildlife. And that's about a $5 million grant. So we submitted under that for the whole Living Shore piece for along the Choptank River. So the process is like a 3-step process. You have to do the risk assessment first. What's your vulnerability and what's your risk? And we did all the flood modeling for that, for different scenarios, for sea level projection out to 2050. That's 2 feet.
2 feet on the Choptank River?
Choptank River.
2050? By
2050. And that's with a 5% chance of exceeding that in any one year. So there's a probabilistic thing, but that's in the Dorchester County Flood Mitigation Plan, which we're implementing. And I'll get into what goes into our project, but one part of it is not just tidal water, but it's also stormwater. And we did design our stormwater component to our project for a 100-year event. That's 10 inches of rain in 24 hours. So that's a pretty heavy duty.
I tend to bring things back to the political level. That's sort of my background. I heard your presentation to the council a few weeks ago. I detected some skepticism on 2 counts. 1, the money, and 2, is this even physically possible? And I guess 3, even if it is physically possible, do we really want to wall off the city from the river? So can you address those?
Absolutely. Well, I'll take the second and third one first.
Okay.
What's emerged over the last, I'd say, decade. We used to, because my background was Army Corp of Engineers. So we had hard infrastructure for flood protection, dams, levees, In fact, even in New Orleans, I mean, that was their levees down there, and you saw what happened after what hurricane? Katrina, yeah. And then there's a school that says the natural nature-based systems are the way to go. The only issue with those is you got to if you get an area like this, you have to have elevation. You can't just make a marsh and expect it to,
like a holding tank.
Yeah, right. You got to have some kind of, so we combined it. It's called a hybrid system. And there's more and more of these now emerging over the years. I did a little research on this and found out that there have been some very successful projects of combining the two. So we got a real flood barrier, like an embankment or a flood wall, and then on the river side of it we have a living shore. So the embankment and flood wall allows us to elevate the landside end of that marsh, so you get additional protection from the elevation. So when you combine the two, it really gives you a lot of good protection. Now, I have a partner, and that is the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences at Horn Point. They're helping us. They're expert in the design of these living shores. So in fact, I've engaged them, and we're going to use them in the detailed design for this. And that's sort of the centerpiece of our project. We had to wrestle with the what elevation we wanted to provide protection to. So that's where the risk modeling came in, and we decided on we had to have at least 5 feet, which is your base flood elevation. That's what Isabel was. That's your base flood elevation for the city, and we would design it for overtopping and also allow us to add additional protection if we needed to. But when we gave our presentation to the different public groups, to our surprise, there was a willingness to go the extra 2 feet in the front end. In other words, rather than having a 5 feet, they were okay with going to 7 feet. And so that's a lot better, because now that gives you the city's base flood elevation is 5 feet. And if any new construction, according to our design requirements, it's a 1.5 freeboard on top of that. So that's 6.5. So we're going above that, and that's really good. The other big positive for our concept is that the living shore, we think, can get us the equivalent of another foot. So it's like 8-foot protection. And so we're very pleased with that. FEMA's going to be very pleased with that. That's what's in our application. And I'll describe it in the way that you would build it. Okay, you would create a rock sill, sort of like a little breakwater, at some point out in the water, maybe anything from 50 to 100 feet from shoreline. And then you would use, in our case, we're going to use, it's going to be a dredge material from local sources, because it's a lot less expensive to do that. So we're looking at dredging like Hambrooks Bay or the Port of Cambridge there. And all that material then will be pumped behind that little breakwater all the way up to the shoreline. And then you adjust the slope of that, and we're looking at very gentle slope, 1 in 10, 1 in 8 at most. And then you would put vegetation on that, seagrasses, different kinds of seagrasses. And then our design, our concept is going to also have a oyster reef at the toe. So we're looking at that, and that'll improve water quality in addition to providing wave protection and stuff like that. But research has shown that this kind of concept design will give you another 20% reduction in storm surge. So if you got a 5-foot storm surge, which we calculated we could have if you had another Isabel, okay, so we'd get the equivalent of 20% of that be another foot. So add that to our 7 feet, we got the equivalent of an 8-foot level of protection for our, well, to the 7 feet, we got it all the way down. It's going from all the way probably at Bellevue Avenue, wherever we can get to 7 feet, all the way down to Cambridge Creek. And in fact, you probably heard me make the comment at the briefing to the City Council that we're going to recommend that they bring somebody on board, whether it's the planning division or public works, that they have somebody that owns this, because this is going to be sort of a full-time thing. We're going to have so we're shifting now. We're on to the next phase. We're shifting from flood mitigation to flood risk reduction. And it's a little different. It's a nuance there where what can we do beyond what you can engineer for to lower your risk, like elevating a home. If you got a vacant lot, don't build on it. Increase your design standards. You know, right now we've got a requirement that any new construction's got to have a 1.5-foot freeboard over base flood elevation. What's 6.5 feet? You could make that 2 feet or 3 feet. We could, and we're working. So, in fact, there's 4 buckets. First bucket is you want to protect the assets you have. So we're going to design this so that if you got a Category 4 hurricane comes right up the Chesapeake Bay, that if you're overtopped, you're not going to wipe it out like Katrina was wiped out. Okay, you can do that. You can armor this thing and hide it all so you don't see it to protect it. You can also design it so that you can add to the protection in the future if you need to or if you want to. And so that's protecting your asset. 2, then you want to look at how can you improve on the design. Okay, so we're just moving into the detailed design phase. So we're going to learn a lot, and we might find some nuances of things like maybe increasing the elevation of the breakwater, or depending on what choices we make for the grasses or the plants. So there's a lot of little nuances there, and then third is biggest category is the third is integrate this all into the comprehensive planning process. In fact, I'm giving a briefing tomorrow to the Planning Commission on exactly this.
County or the county?
City. Because they have the comprehensive plan from 2011. They got the Waterfront implementation plan 2017. And in there, they recommended, we recommend a living shore, but you need to look at sea level rise, storm surge, all these other risk factors that they didn't take into account, which we now have done. So now we can integrate this into the comprehensive plan. Yeah. That's 3. 4 is working with the public to educate them on how they can reduce their own personal risk. That's where we, elevating the houses. You can flood-proof your house. You can build a rain garden. There's a lot of things you can do. And also it educates the public on what's going to transpire over the next decade in terms of who's maintaining this. So we're going to have a maintenance program for it. We're going to educate the public on what they have to do. The city will know what they have to do. So it's going to be managed. One thing I learned when I was with the Corps, after Agnes, we manned a lot of the levees up in the Susquehanna River Basin, and like Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Yeah, they had what they call stop log structures, where roads and railroads crossed the levee, and nobody knew where they were. So they built landfills on the river side of the levee. Okay, they mined the coal under the ground, so the levee was not a constant elevation. So we learn a lot. You just can't turn this over to the public and say, oh, it's, that's like designing something and then putting it on a shelf. It's not going to work. You got to have continuity of support for the whole project. But so the stormwater management part of it is there are 2 parts. One is, and we know there's 12 or 15 stormwater lines that discharge into the chop tank. So when you get a high tide, the water, there's no controls on the end, or if there is controls, they're not working. So the water just backs up into the streets when you get a high tide. Right. Okay, so we're going to put controls on the end of those lines. So when you get a high tide, they're shut off. And then we're going to have a system on top, the existing system, where we're going to tap those storm lines. So when they're shut off, Water will back up and now into a new system that will collect it, pump it, and store it in 2 locations. They did all the flood mapping. This is for the 10 inches of rain in 24 hours. So they mapped all that flood routing, and so we're going to store it in 2 locations. One is along the public property in front of the marina, and the other is up around Jerry Boyle Park. Well, there's a number of different. We're going to, in the detailed design, we'll look at a number of different. But right now, the current concept is it'll be near surface. You can't go too far below water table because it'll have the buoyancy effect. But it'll be out of sight. It'll be covered with soil, so it'll be just below grade.
Also, like a large tank or something.
It's actually a series of tanks,
Okay.
and then there from there then it'll be pumped to up to well, there's two discharge points. One is near the marina there, and there's another one up at the park itself. Now the part that hasn't been finalized that we'll do in the detailed design is we're looking for nature-based discharges. So, for example, if you've got this living shore, is there a way we can irrigate it with this flood stormwater? Or is there another way? We don't want to just dump it in the river. We want to use it to as part of the project. I should have mentioned that's another thing we're going to try to do. We're going to practice what the Dutch do. The Dutch have a thing, it's called living with water. So they've learned over decades, probably centuries, that it's better to let the water in and then you control it so that you don't damage any infrastructure or flood or put anybody at risk. And so that's why they've got a lot of these lagoons and things like this. And even under the streets, you can't see it. It's all hidden. It's just blended into the environment. But that's,
How much time?
well, we're committed to a 3-year project, and we think we can do it. So we're looking at about the living shore is probably about 1 mile in length if you look at it. So it'll wherever we can get to 7 feet elevation, it might be all the way up to Bellevue Avenue. But if that's the case, that's fine. And then down to Cambridge Creek. Now we will have at High Street probably it's what's called a stop log structure. So you have slots on either end of the streets where you physically put these things in there, and then you lock them in place, and that gives you flood protection. You could go to the expense of, so they pop up like bollards, but it'd probably be too expensive. But we think we can do it with just a regular stop log. I mean, it's exciting. We're excited about it, and.